everybody. Welcome to our webinar today on heat pump water heaters, the lowest cost, lowest carbon hot water. I'm Joe Wachunas with you with Brian Stewart, my teammate as always from Electrify Now. We'll introduce our panelists in just a second. Today's webinar is being brought to you by Electrify Now, which is an all-volunteer organization promoting electrification as the quickest path to decarbonization. It's something we can all take part in. You can get tips to electrify every part of your home at our site at electrifynow.net. It's also being brought to you by the LEARN program, which is a San Diego-based workforce and education and training program that has partnered with Electrify Now to offer these free energy efficiency and electrification webinars. Please visit the LEARN website for more information, www.sandiego.learn. Great. Well, so today this webinar is part of our Go Electric webinar series, talking about the benefits of electrification for homeowners, which of course include lower energy bills. We'll see that today, cleaner indoor air, lower pollution outside, more comfort, and increased safety. And why are we focusing so much today and this week on hot water? Well, a lot of folks don't think about their water heater, but it's the second highest energy user in the home. Up to 20% of home energy use is used for heating water, so that's a lot. And new heat pump water heaters are extremely efficient. We'll see that in just a second illustrated. So today we're going to talk about what heat pump water heaters are. It'll be a heat pump water heater 101 for us all. How do they compare to other water heating technologies? And what do you need to know to get one installed in your home if you're on your heat pump water heater journey? Okay, so to illustrate some of these points, the big three as far as carbon emissions in most of our lives are our water heater. This might be a surprise, which is 1 to 3 tons of CO2 annually emitted, and your gas furnace and a gas car. So look at 4 to 8 tons for each of those. So those are the big three. If we can tackle those big three, then we are well on our way to decarbonization. And so we'll talk about the water heater today. Now, heat pump water heaters are an energy efficient choice for water heating. They're 3 to 5 times more efficient. They've been out since 2009, but it's an old technology that is used in refrigerators. Basically, it's a compressor on top of an electric water heater tank. And that compressor just harvests air from the surrounding space that the water heater is in and concentrates that air into refrigerant coils and wraps around a tank and transfers that heat to the water tank. It doesn't exhaust any pollution, just cool air. And so heat pump water heaters need some air to breathe. We'll talk about that in just a second. But they don't exhaust anything like NOx or any of those other pollutants that fossil fuel water heaters do. Now, there are some split heat pump water heaters where the compressor is located outdoors and the tank is indoors usually. We're not going to get into those too much today, but they do exist. Great, so this just gives you a little lay of the land for the type of water heaters that are out there typically. On your left, you have electric storage, and then you have 3 types of fossil fuel water heaters, propane and gas, and then you have heat pump on the right. Now, if you want to, water heating efficiency is measured in UEF, which is how much energy you put into the water, how much energy you get out. And as you can see, the UEF for heat pump water heaters is 3 to 5 times more than the other types of water heaters. A lot of folks think that, oh, your gas tankless water heater is going to be the most efficient because it doesn't have that storage tank of water. No, heat pump water heater is still almost 4 times more efficient than the best gas tankless water heater. And the upfront costs for these different water heaters can vary. Some of the older storage tanks can be a little cheaper with that upfront cost. And heat pump water heaters are typically between $1,500 and $2,500. That's kind of comparable to the gas tankless water heaters. But look at the operating costs for this equipment. You can see the heat pump water heaters are by far the lowest cost option. In pretty much every part of the country, you're going to pay between $100 to $200 a year to heat all the water your family uses. And other water heating types are 3 to 5 times that amount. And of course, the carbon emissions follow suit. Heat pump water heaters have a minuscule 0.4 tons of CO2 emitted a year. And if you have access to renewable energy or subscribe to community solar, you can bring those carbon emissions down to 0. Let's just talk about a little bit what you need. Like we talked about before, you need some airspace for that heat pump water heater to breathe, to pull that warmth out of the water heater. And so depending on the manufacturer, they recommend between 400 and 700 cubic feet of air for your water heater to breathe. So if you have your water heater located in a garage or a basement, that's typically more than enough air. If you're like me and you have your water heater located on a utility closet, there are still other strategies. You can have a louver door that allows air to enter into that utility closet, or you can put in wall grates. My wife and I just did this in our home, and we have wall grates that lead right behind the fridge. It's a perfect marriage between those two technologies because those fridge exhausts a warm air. In some cases where you just don't have enough airspace, you can duct a heat pump water heater, but there's usually other options so you don't have to duct that cool air out of the space. Most heat pump water heaters, you're going to want a dedicated 240 amp circuit, a 240 volt, circuit. We're going to talk about ones that are plug-in 120 volt heat pump water heaters. But you're going to want that circuit. So if you have an electric water heater that you're replacing electric resistance, you already have that electricity on site. If you have a fossil fuel power water heater, you're going to want to maybe run a new electrical line. And then the one thing you're going to have to think about for heat pump water heaters, just like a lot of appliances like gas furnaces, you'll have to dispose of this condensation. It's not acidic like with fossil fuel appliances where they have acidic condensate, but you do have some a water that's produced usually between 1 and 2 liters a day that has to be run either to a floor drain or your laundry drain, or if you don't have any of those options, usually you can get a condensate pump that pumps it away from the water heater.
Great. Well, so as Joe said, if currently you have an electric water heater, then replacing that with a heat pump water heater is pretty straightforward. It's essentially a 1-for-1 replacement. Those space options or space considerations we talked about, so you've got enough room for it to breathe is important. They typically are a little bit taller than conventional water heaters, but for the most part, you're literally unplugging the old one and plugging the new one in. If you have a gas water heater, however, it's a slightly more complicated situation because you're not going to have that dedicated 240 volt circuit there unless in some situations people had electric water heaters and they replaced them with gas and now they're going back to electric. If you're in that situation, you're fortunate because you probably already have the circuit, but most people are going to need a new 240 volt circuit run from their panel to the location where your water heater is. And that most of the time that's the way to go. But there are situations where that can be expensive. It might trigger a panel upgrade or other electrical costs that can be expensive. And that's why this product that's called the 120 volt heat pump water heater is so exciting. We'll talk more about this in a minute, and we'll talk about this in depth with our panelist who's got a lot of experience putting these in. But essentially these 120 volt circuit models were designed specifically for gas water heater replacements where it's going to be difficult or expensive to put in a dedicated circuit. So how do the two things compare, the 240 versus the 120? They're essentially the same technology on the inside. All the heat pump part of it is essentially the same, and that's the magic part. But what's different between these two are the 240 volt ones also have electric resistance heat. That's why they're often referred to as hybrid models. And so they have the ability to act like an electric resistance water heater, whereas the 120 volt models don't have that. So they're relying on the heat pump only to heat the water. But there's some advantages. Like we said, you're able to use a 120 volt existing circuit, and it can even be a shared circuit. It doesn't even have to be dedicated. So with the 241, you're using the existing one or putting in a new one. With the existing 240 volt line. With a 120 volt, you can use an existing, whatever the gas water heater was using before, because most likely it needed 120 volts for either the fan or the condensate pump or something, or there's likely to be one nearby. The 120 volt models are slightly less energy efficient, but they're still way more energy efficient than anything else out there. So that's not really a concern. They have a slightly lower first hour rating, which means this is how much water if your water heater is fully charged up and it's been, purring away in your basement all night, let's say, and then the next morning you want to take a shower, you're going to get 55 gallons in the first hour of hot water versus 67 for the 240 volt. But the bigger issue may be that the recovery rate is slower. So for the 240 volts, these are operating essentially exactly like, or they can operate just like an electric resistance model if they get forced into that backup kind of electric resistance mode. The heat pump ones don't have that. So you're going to be slower to reheat the tank. There are things like mixing valves, which we'll talk more about, that are pretty much standard on these 120 volt models, which helps to give you more hot water by increasing the temperature in the tank, and then it mixes cold water as it comes out of the tank, which gives you a lot more hot water. So we'll talk more about how that affects performance. But for the most part, if the 240 volt ones are perfect for replacing existing electric water heaters, and it's the best way to go if wiring isn't difficult. If you use a lot of hot water, you might want to size up, but we hear a lot, and that's certainly our case in our house, that if you've got an existing 50-gallon electric water heater, you can go with a 50-gallon 240 volt heat pump, and most likely you're going to be fine. If you're experiencing water problems, you might want to upgrade with it to a larger size. But for the 120 volt models, it's often recommended to go one model size up, a little bit bigger tank to get more hot water. All right. So in terms of the manufacturers, there are more and more manufacturers all the time. Rheem, A.O. Smith, and Bradford White were sort of first ones to really get serious about this technology. But there are many more players out there and more coming in all the time. We're going to be talking about that tomorrow in a webinar dedicated to that exact topic. You can see the Sanco is an example of the split system over on the right, but the others are more just essentially like conventional units. They don't really have dramatic differences in terms of their performance rating or cost to operate. They're very similar. So I would say that our recommendation would be that if the most important thing is to find a good installer who's got a lot of experience installing these, and then see what they say. They most likely have a recommendation because it's something that they're familiar with. They've got experience servicing it or whatever it is. And oftentimes that's more important than trying to choose a model based on one of these differences in specs. By the way, they all have 10-year warranties, which is really important. That just means that they stand behind their products. And just to put that in perspective, like typical gas and electric water heaters have 5 or 6 year warranties. So it's saying something that they are confident that their products are going to perform. All right, let's talk quickly about incentives. There's federal tax credits, which you're probably aware of through the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. And you can get 30% of the installation cost up to $2,000. And so you might not get all that $2,000 because 30%, it depends on how expensive your install costs were, though. In some cases you might, but in some cases you might not get all of that, but you're still going to get a chunk of money from the feds. There are rebates also coming from the IRA program that are going to come with income qualifications. So you have to be either low or median area income in order to qualify for these. It really varies state by state. They're just starting to roll out. I think New York has theirs going now, but most states aren't going to get theirs going until probably mid to late next year or even 2026. There's a lot of program work that they're doing to figure out how to use this money from the federal government. But there are also existing state and utility rebates that are out there right now that can save you hundreds of dollars. Here are just a few of them that we're aware of. You can look at the Energy Star rebate finder, energystar.gov/rebate finder. We'll put that link in the chat. And you can check out what's available in your area, but you can see that these range from like the low of $350 up to as high as $2,300 rebates. So it really can be a good way to lower the costs and essentially make them a similar, or in some cases even less expensive than to install than those conventional technologies we talked about. So it's exciting what's happening. If you look at sales, this is a relatively new product in the market. Most people aren't familiar with these. So there's a lot of just education that's happening and awareness that's happening, but you can see the growth is pretty quick. But there's still a long ways to go in order for them to be comparable with the other kinds of water heaters that are being sold in the millions. But what's also happening that's going to really increase the speed of adoption here is that the federal standards for efficiency are changing starting in 2029, which means that for electric water heaters, this heat pump technology is going to be required for anything over 35 gallons. So that's been essentially going to mean that starting in 2029, you won't be able to buy a standard electric resistance water heater. It's going to push people into these dramatically more energy efficient models. So we have some great resources for you. We'll put the links here in the chat. Of course, Electrify Now has a lot of information about the technology, the incentives, information about installers, et cetera, for the Oregon area and locally in Portland where we are. We also have the Switches On, which is an excellent resource in California and starting to be better and better in Washington as they move into that state, that has great information about the product, incentives, and how to find good contractors. And then if you're outside of those areas, Rewiring America is a great resource. They have a contractor finder that will help you to find someone that's got experience with this product in your area. Okay, this is time to introduce our panelists. We're really excited to have Tristan Dennis with us from Barnett Plumbing. He's a project manager for Barnett, and he's managed over 500 heat pump water heater installations, which gives him that's a high bar because this is relatively new technology, like we mentioned. So there are probably not that many firms out there that have installed this many. So he's got a lot of experience with this, and he works with the contractors and homeowners to educate them on the benefits of heat pump water heaters, make sure that all the products are inspected for final installation permits. And he also works with local and state programs to make sure that these installation programs and application processes are as streamlined as possible. So he's got a lot of varied experience, and we're really excited to have him with us today. So welcome, Tristan. Really glad you could join us.
Thanks, Brian. Excited to be here.
And Brian, we're still seeing your slides, Brian.
Oh, is that right? Sorry. I'm sorry. There we go. Yeah, Tristan, why don't we start by why don't you tell us a little bit about Barnett and just a little bit more about what you do there and the experience you guys have had specifically with heat pump water heaters. And yeah.
Yeah, sure. Like Brian said, my name's Tristan. I work with Barnett Plumbing and Water Heaters. We've been around since 2005, so we're actually just about to hit our 20th birthday. We are located in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we've been installing heat pump water heaters for a few years now, and have participated in a lot of the incentive programs that have come through over the last few years, which this last year is actually when I came on, and we installed over 500 heat pump water heaters. So we do have quite a lot of experience with them, and we found them to be a really great option for homeowners in the area.
Awesome. So maybe you can talk to us about the top things that you think a homeowner should consider when getting ready for a heat pump water heater installation. You know, we talked about some of them: location, their water heater type. But yeah, what are your top considerations when somebody's starting on their heat pump water heater journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of them, like you said, location is a big one. So at Barnett, we actually we typically upsize the water heater whenever we're switching to a heat pump. So we always make sure that there's at least a bit more space. One other thing that we want to make sure that homeowners take into consideration is they are a bit noisier, especially if you're going from a gas or electric water heater. So if they are up against a bedroom wall or something like that, we might suggest relocating. There's almost always a place to relocate it to, so that's usually not an issue, but it's just something to take into consideration. Also, making sure that you have enough airspace. Like you guys had said earlier, it's super important to make sure that you have the correct amount of airspace that the manufacturer recommends so that the heat pump technology works correctly. Condensation lines, you do want to make sure you have a termination point for those. You definitely have to have somewhere for that water to go to. Like Joe said, it is not acidic, so it's in every building department we've worked with. It's even fine to run it to the outside of the home if you don't necessarily have a drain nearby. And then also just to keep in mind that since the recovery rate is lower, just to pay attention to your usage rate and maybe consider upsizing, maybe depending on how much your household uses or how many bathrooms you have.
Yeah, well, maybe since we are there on the upsizing conversation, maybe we should just jump into that. We
Sure.
got lots of good questions, and by the way, please put your questions in the Q&A. We'll try to make sure we answer them. Yeah, so I've heard differing things, and I think part of the I think let me just explain a little bit about remind people about the 240 volt ones. Let's start with the 240 volt
Sure,
ones,
yeah.
because they have this ability to work in two modes, basically electric resistance mode and heat pump mode. The truth is you want to avoid using electric resistance as much as possible. In fact, we have ours put on heat pump only mode, which means that it won't turn the electric resistance strips on, which means that it's going to heat water more slowly for that recovery time. But I've heard varying things about, the need for upsizing. We didn't do that in our house. We had a 50-gallon gas, really a Provent model. And on the noise side, actually, our heat pump water heater is less noisy than that was. But we didn't upsize. We haven't had problems. We've had 3, children with us and made it work. It wasn't really an issue. We have low flow shower heads and that sort of thing, which I'm sure is part of it. But I think if you use a lot of water, hot water, you might be triggering that resistance mode more often, which is, I guess, one of the advantages of upsizing. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So we want to make sure that our customers see as much savings as possible. So that's part of the reason for upsizing. Like you said, I mean, we have had homeowners who really wanted to just go same size water heater. And in those cases, it is most of the time worked. It's just we've had some cases where it didn't. They didn't take into account their usage very well. And so it just kind of on the safe side, we like to size it up at least once with the 240 volt, like you said, and we actually go sometimes 2 sizes up with the 120 volts, since there's no chance for the recovery rate to be increased with the
right
heating elements.
So one strategy is to upsize the tank to get a little bit more hot water. Another interesting strategy, Red, is to do a mixing valve. So for folks who are not familiar with water heater jargon, mixing valve is a valve that will allow you to heat your water heater to a higher temperature. Typically, water heaters come factory set at 120 degrees, but you can heat it up to 130, 140 degrees. That gets hot. And so the mixing valve mixes in cold water so that you don't get scalded. Tristan, talk to us about when mixing valves are a good idea, and tell us a little bit about Barnett's approach to using mixing valves.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. So we actually always include a mixing valve with our installations. We want there to be as much efficiency as possible when installing these water heaters. And so, like you said, it just allows us to set the temperature to be always at 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And that way, whenever the homeowner calls for hot water, it's not using only hot water from the tank. It's also pulling a little bit of cold to bring down the temperature to the actual desired temperature of usually 120 degrees Fahrenheit.
So you get that extra water heater. I've heard manufacturers, or we heard actually yesterday in our DIY install, that for every 10 degrees above, you get almost like as if you have 10 more gallons of hot water. Is that?
That sounds right. I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but that does sound correct.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, I was talking to the Efficiency Maine folks the other day, and they've installed, they've installed 70,000 of these in Maine, which is fantastic. It's like,
that's huge.
they're ahead of the curve there, and because they've got really good programs that make it really cost effective for homeowners. They mostly install 50 gallons. They said that one of the things they do is they recommend people turn their water heater up to 125, 130, even without a mixing valve. You got to be a little careful because it's going to be hotter. 130, I don't think it's quite scalding, but it's hot. So you got to be a little bit careful. But and then use those low flow fixtures and that sort of thing to and they say most of the time that works. But I think it really depends a lot on just how much hot water you use. So but I think there's strategies both ways. It sounds like some of the manufacturers, Joe, isn't this correct, are thinking about including mixing valves standard in some of these units.
Yeah, we're excited about that. I don't know if you're Tristan, but a couple of models coming out will have mixing valves integrated into the water heater, and I know already the 120 volt plug-in models have
Mhm.
integrated mixing valves. Is that
Right, yeah, the 120 volts do, and then we just add on for the 240s.
got it? It'd be nice. I think in the future we'll see integrated mixing valves even in the 240s, which would be great for folks.
That would be awesome, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Tristan, just in terms of installation, so if you were installing a heat pump water heater versus an electric resistance water, say somebody already has an electric resistance water heater,
Mhm.
they want to go to upgrade to a heat pump. Is the installation cost different than if you were just putting in another resistance water heater, or is it similar?
So compared to a resistance, so it is a bit higher just because, for instance, we need to run the condensate line out, and then and then the tank itself costs more typically.
Right.
And then you also want to again take into consideration any space requirements. So say it's in a closet, we might have to install louvers or special ducting for it to work right. And then the only other thing to consider would be if it has side connections. So a lot of heat pump water heaters have different connections for the water lines, whereas most electric resistance, the water lines come in through the top of the water heater. A lot of the heat pumps come in through the side, so it costs a little extra to the extra work and the extra copper for that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm excited. So I think some new heat pump water heater models have those connections at the top.
Yeah,
So that'll make life easier.
that's new. Yeah.
Lots of nice
Yeah.
improvements coming in with later models. We're getting a lot of great questions in the Q&A. Someone is asking about condensate pumps. Can you tell us, they're wondering, do you have to have a condensate pump for all installations? Tell us about how Barnett usually runs the condensate line.
Yeah. So you don't need them for all installations. We only use them whenever we need to go against grade. We usually try to have them downgrade out of the home or to a drain. So what we'll do is the little flexible plastic pipe that's attached to the water heater will transition into hard PVC pipe. And then we'll run it like we would, like you would with an HVAC. A lot of building departments actually allow you to tie it into the HVAC condensate line, so that you don't need more than one termination point. But yeah, we'll run it to that and then try and downgrade it out. If it needs to go up and out, like say through a basement or something like that, that's when we would use a pump.
Gotcha.
Right.
And then another question, Danita's asking about, her gas water here has to be on a stand. I think that has something to do with ventilation and vapor or something like that. But
correct.
do heat pump water heaters need to be on a stand?
They do not. At least in California, the only thing to consider is that if you put it on the floor in a garage and it's in the way of a vehicle, sometimes that stands, when you drop to the floor, you'll need to install a bollard, like a protection pole. But if it's on a stand, usually it's not required. So you just, in terms of the functionality though, no, it's totally fine to drop it to the floor.
Great. This question is, I think, asked a lot. Talk to us about recirculation pumps. Someone's asking if they have one with a timer. Some folks have these recirc pumps that recirculate hot water in their pipes all the time. So when you open your faucet, you instantly get that hot water out. They're also very wasteful because you're constantly heating that water in your lines. What works best for heat pump water? Because there are some considerations with recirc pumps.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you brought that up, actually. So with recirculation pumps, there are actually new pumps on the market that are specifically designed for heat pump water heaters. The issue we found with your typical either timer or auto adapt feature recirculation pumps is that they would pump lukewarm water into the tank, and the sensors in the heat pump water heater tanks weren't able to determine whether it should heat up or not. So either we would have homeowners getting cold water, or the heat pump backup heating elements in a hybrid would run more than they were actually needing to. And so there's these newer models that are called on-demand recirculation pumps that basically either have a motion sensor or a push button. So you walk into your bathroom and you either press a button or the motion sensor sees you pass by, and it'll trigger the pump to start running so that in a few minutes, you don't need to have your faucet running or anything. And then in a few minutes, you should be able to turn it on and have that instant hot water.
Gotcha.
Great.
Hey, we talked a little bit about ducting, and I know there's some questions in the Q&A and chat about that. How often do you find you have to do that, and how difficult is it? I'm sure it's kind of a little hard to answer that question because every house is a little bit different, but what would you say generally about ducting?
So we haven't had to do a lot of ducting just because, at least we're in our location, most water heaters are located in the garage. If they're in an outside closet, we'll just install louvers, and that is more than enough. So we have done it on a couple homes, though. In that case, we subcontract for an HVAC company to come out and basically let us know what needs to be done. And then we'll have them usually come out after we install the heat pump water heater. And then in the interim, we'll just like leave the door open or something like that to give it the airflow. But I definitely would make sure you have the airflow. We have had customers in the past where we didn't install the right size louvers, and that actually did cause the heat pump to show error codes. And so it was easily fixed by increasing the airflow to the area.
Gotcha.
I would put in a plug for also louvered doors. I mean, I think ducting is considered maybe the option of last resort.
Yeah.
You really don't have that airspace. For a long time, just speaking personally, we ducted our water heater to our attic, and it works fine. But in just doing a remodel this year, we put in some wall grates, as I mentioned before, that lead right behind my fridge. And you can get that passive air transfer into another room. If you can dump it into the kitchen, I saw somebody mention the bathroom. Those are hot areas, and you can. That's great. You can pull the heat from those areas, and that seems to work well. Do you guys ever do wall grates, Tristan, between rooms, or anything creative on that end? Or it's mostly garages, I think you said.
Yeah, and we usually just use the doors, if anything.
Got it. Great.
Yeah, while we're talking about this temperature thing, so these devices do cool the space they're in slightly. I mean, we talked about it, but maybe we should go into that a little bit more. Like, for instance, we have ours in the basement. It's a unfinished basement. It's not a conditioned space, but because it's underground, it's almost always like 55 degrees or something down there, between 55 and 60 degrees. I think it does. I think when we first put it in, it felt like it lowered the temperature maybe a degree or something like that in our space. It dehumidified, which was really nice because it got rid of a lot of the kind of mildew problems that we had down there. But what you don't want to put it in a space that you're like spending a lot of time in. But what would you say just about that temperature decrease that you're going to get in the space, Tristan? How do you advise homeowners on that?
Yeah, so we recommend against putting them in, say, if you have a converted garage, we wouldn't have it in the same space that you're sleeping in unless you want that cool air, which, we did actually have a customer recently who specifically wanted to duct it to a certain room in the house to cool down that room. And so there's a way to kind of use that as a benefit rather than a drawback. Kind of like you said with the dehumidification. And so, but it's not super noticeable. It just depends on the area it's in and what the use of that room is.
Yeah, that sounds great. Again, speaking from experience, we have ours in a utility closet. It gets a little cooler when it's running, those 6 to 8 hours, but most of the time it's not very noticeable. And in the summer, it's a benefit. We've gotten a couple questions on like, what's the minimum ambient temperature required for the heat pump water heater? What's the temperature range that they can operate in? And what happens, say, if it probably wouldn't happen very often, but if it falls below that temperature range or potentially above that?
Yeah, you know what? Let me pull that up because I don't remember off the top of my head. I believe it's a little different depending on the manufacturer. But I know that we've never had a water heater get a heat pump get too cold. Now we are in the San Francisco Bay Area, so we don't get freezing temperatures. If you do, I would just recommend going with an electric, or sorry, not electric resistance, going with the hybrid that has the backup heating elements, because if the heat pump gets too cold, then you have the backup heating elements so that you never run out of hot water.
Yeah, I know a lot of the manufacturers say, in fact, I was just looking at Bradford White. They had this, 10 myths about heat pump water heaters. And one was that you can't put them in outside in unconditioned garages in the north. And they say exactly what you said, Tristan, that with the 240 volt models, if the heat pump isn't capable of working because it's too cold, it'll switch to electric resistance. And, I think the thing is that, at least my opinion about that is, if every once in a while your water heater has to go into electric resistance mode because you've got a house full of kids who came home from a soccer match and all need to take a shower or something, like whatever it is, or you're in a cold place like that where, for every once in a while the heat pump isn't able to keep up and it goes into electric resistance. I don't think that's a big deal, because you're overall going to most likely end up way, way better off in terms of cost of operation than any of these other technologies. But it is true that you should try to get it to operate in heat pump only mode as much as possible, because that's where you're going to see the biggest savings. Yeah.
And I think I geek out a lot on water heaters. I think the ambient range I think it's 37 degrees. That's the low, to 120 degrees.
That sounds right to
All
me.
below that. And that's true, unless you have a cold climate heat pump, that's true. That's where the frost forms. And so the heat pump can't operate below that. But again, then it goes into electric resistance, as Brian and Tristan were saying.
I mean, Tristan, we kind of glossed over the brand differences, but do you have a point of view about that? I mean, I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, is there certain brands that you think are worth, the rise to the top somehow at the moment in terms of what's out there?
Yeah, so our preference at Barnett is Bradford White. That partially just has to do with the fact that they're more contractor friendly. So I don't even, as far as I understand, I don't think, unless you're a contractor, that you can buy a Bradford White heat pump. And part of the reason for that is you get much quicker help and turnaround on if you ever have warranty issues or things like that. They also have the Top Connect, which I know Rheem is just coming out with their Top Connect now. But for a while that made installations much easier. I will say though, when it comes, we have part of the tech program in California was that it needed to be Wi-Fi connectable. And the Rheems are much better on that front in terms of being their usability and ability to connect to the Wi-Fi. And really, there's not a huge difference between the two in terms of reliability. We just prefer the process with Bradford White.
Maybe
Yeah, that's fair. Say a
of-
little bit more about the Wi-Fi then. Why was that a requirement?
In our territories, the utility companies had to set up time of use schedules. So basically the rates are higher between, say, 4 and 9 p.m. Or some other time frame. And so the water heaters would automatically switch to vacation mode during that time, so that then they weren't using that energy, and it would help actually lower the homeowner's bills as well.
That's great. Yeah. That's a cool feature.
They seem to be very shiftable. People can turn them off during those peak times, and people never notice the difference because they store so much energy.
I mean, I have found just that Wi-Fi smart thing is pretty useful. Like when you go for a vacation, you're, oh shoot, I forgot to turn the water heater off. You can just do it on your phone. It's really nice.
You can see energy usage on the apps. I think most of the models have some pretty cool apps.
Our homeowners love it.
Nice. We are getting some questions on split units. I don't know, Tristan, if you all have installed any split heat pump water heaters. To my knowledge, the only one currently on the market is the Eco 2 system that we showed in our water heaters, but there are new manufacturers getting into the game. Brian and I are going to be talking with the manufacturer EmberTech, which makes a split unit tomorrow in Heat Pump Water Heater Day. But yeah, talk to us about, do you have any experience with split units where the compressors outside and the tank is inside?
Yeah, a very limited amount, but yeah, we installed 1 or 2. Realistically, like my understanding is a split unit is everything you wanted a heat pump to be. Even their cooling system is, if I remember right, CO2 rather than, I forget actually what the other one is. But anyways, they're super efficient. They actually have a lower operating temperature as well. And so they really are like, if you have a large home, that would be kind of the route to go in terms of making sure that you have plenty of hot water all the time and running it just with the heat pump.
They're typically more expensive, I would assume, to install and
Yes,
everything. Yeah.
that is the drawback, is they are quite a bit more expensive.
Mm.
I think what we see is that there are lots of, for example, the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance now has a hot water innovation prize to get a split unit that's affordable. So I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see manufacturers bring their split. They exist in Asia, they exist in Europe, and
Right.
they'll bring them to the US to give us more product options. And
Yeah,
I
there's
guess,
a question here about noise too, and I guess the split would that be another advantage to the split one is the noise is outside the house, right? Not
Yeah,
inside.
exactly. It'd just be like having your air conditioning outside the home running.
Mm, right.
how about someone's asking just about location, and you mentioned this before, whether you can locate a water heater outdoors. In California, that seems to happen a decent amount. Any drawbacks if it's an outdoor closet, your water heater, to putting a heat pump water heater in?
It's really just making sure you have enough airflow if it's in a closet. Besides that, I mean, just make sure it's a hybrid in that case, just in case. We did have one homeowner where he was concerned because we had a cold snap, and for a couple days it was going into the hybrid or the electric resistance mode, and he just wanted to know why. But just to make sure that you're aware of that. But they work very well outside. We even did a little bit of innovation creating our own outside closets using enclosures. And so, yeah, it's something that we do often.
Okay, we should talk a little bit about 120 volt models. We haven't talked a bunch about that yet. So, are you installing many of those, Tristan?
Yeah, we install a lot of them. They're a great option for homeowners.
What is it? What tell us a scenario that kind of triggers going that way?
Yeah, there's a few. One would be if, say you have a 40-gallon gas water heater that is, or actually a better scenario is, say you have a gas water heater that has direct or power venting. Usually the cost to replace that is almost exactly the same, if not a little bit more than switching to a 120 volt heat pump water heater. And because the venting on those has an outlet, there's already a plug there to plug right into. So that's like the best case scenario. We also use them with older homes where a panel upgrade would be required for a 240 volt. So that way we can save the homeowner money and just use an existing circuit in the garage or in the home, and just maybe all we'd have to do is run an outlet closer, but you do have a 10-foot cord with 120 volts. So most of the time we can just plug it right into an existing outlet.
Yeah, that's great.
And then we're getting a couple questions just asking us to talk about noise a little bit. I know we've touched on it briefly, Tristan, but where have you seen noise become an issue for homeowners? Like, yeah, is there a location? Is it, is there a model or brand? Where is noise an issue from heat pump water heaters for homeowners?
Yeah, it's really only an issue if it's butted up against, say, a bedroom wall. And even in that case, it really depends on the homeowner and on the home itself. We've had plenty that go up against the wall of a bedroom and there's no issues because maybe the insulation's better, the homeowner doesn't mind it. They're not super loud or anything. I usually equate it to what it sounds like to have your air conditioning unit run outside, maybe even a bit quieter. It also depends on the model. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it might be A.O. Smith that says they have the quietest heat pump on the market. But again, they're usually pretty similar across the board, and they're not like crazy loud or anything. They're just, some people don't like the added noise within their living space.
It seems like there was a period where there was a model version. I think it was one of the Reams and some of the early models that when these were first coming out, they had some vibration stuff. So it was a combination of noise and vibration. But it feels like they've kind of remedied that. That's the impression I'm getting, because I just don't hear about it that much anymore. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, it's definitely tapered off. I agree with that. It's not really a big issue. We just like to make sure our homeowners
Yeah.
are aware of that before we move forward. And we install sound dampening or vibration dampening blocks at every point of contact as well. So usually that also is more than enough to stop there from being any issues.
Yeah. One question I have for you is that a lot of these, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, they'll have modes. They have different modes of operation. So there'll be hybrid mode or energy saver mode or heat pump only mode. And it can be confusing, I think, for people to know what to do with that. What do you recommend people do in terms of which mode to select?
Well, when first installing it, we usually like to have our homeowners try out heat pump only mode, just because that's the most efficient. That's what you got a heat pump for. And if for any reason you notice like, oh, like after the fifth kid takes a shower, I start to notice it gets cold, then you can switch it to say energy saver mode, where it still prioritizes the heat pump, but if needed, it'll kick in the heating elements. And if we're running a test or something, we might kick it into electric only mode, but we never have the homeowners leave it on that, because otherwise could have just gotten an electric resistance water heater.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems to be my experience, Brian's experience. Run it in heat pump mode. Maybe there's a certain times of years where you want to take it out, or if you have a larger house or a lot more showers. Yeah.
Yeah, like maybe, it's the holidays and you got a lot of people visiting, put it in one of those other modes, but most of the time, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
There's a good question here from Gary about how do you calculate the extra heat load that these can add to that a furnace might, because it's basically cooling your home somewhat.
Mhm.
It could potentially add heating load to your home. In the summer, you're getting air conditioning out of it, so that's a benefit. But in the winter, do you have a point of view about that, or a way of talking to customers about that?
Not necessarily. And, the reason is because usually we're installing these actually in unconditioned spaces. They're usually not affecting the heat load on the home, the interior at all. And when we do install them indoors, we do ducting, so it's blowing the cold air out somewhere else. So it's not usually an issue that we run into.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you have to think, like, if you're right, installing them in your garage, that's an unconditioned space. Your basement, semi-conditioned, you've got that's below ground level, so you're getting that, kind of free 55-degree temperature all the time. I can speak personally, from our now exhausting it into our home, it's pretty minimal. I think we do hear this a lot, but it's you're going to have a big load on your heating system. But I think that's more of a myth. It's not that much.
Yeah. I mean, you think about it, nobody really worries about that with their refrigerators, but that's probably more of a concern, to be honest, because that's your living space, your kitchen. But it's just not a lot of heat that's being, moved one way or another.
Yeah. I think maybe as we're wrapping up, Tristan, do you have any top tips for folks who are calling a contractor? What should they ask for when they're getting their heat pump water heater bid?
Yeah. The two main things I would ask for are, one, are they going to pull a permit? We've seen unpermitted heat pump installs, and they are rough. You definitely, when a contractor is pulling a permit, they're going to do quality work, because then, they know the city's going to come out, be inspecting it, make sure everything's up to code. And at least in this time, they know that they're probably going to get calls from the inspectors, because these are still fairly new to the market. And so a lot of building departments aren't familiar. And so the contractor has to be prepped and ready to answer why everything's running the way it is, and what even is the heat pump water heater. So it kind of shows that there's a lot of quality and a lot of expertise with heat pumps when the permit's already a part of the installation. One other thing is just to make sure that especially, or if you're going with a 240 volt model, that your contractor is going to do a load calculation. You want to make sure that you're not overloading your panel with it. We have seen where you know, a homeowner just kind of had somebody install a heat pump or did it themselves, and now, you know, their panel needs to be upgraded because that's the only way that they're not going to keep tripping the breaker. And so those two things are the main things I would say to keep an eye out for and ask for when shopping around for contractors.
Yeah, that sounds good. And then of course, make sure that they've installed a bunch of these already.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, that's a good one too. But and the other thing, you know, I don't know, we see in a lot of places, just in terms of advice to you out there who might be looking at these, a lot of times it's the HVAC installers who are the first to embrace this technology and do water heating installs, as opposed to the local plumbers. That's often the case. We've seen that in a couple of places. I think as they're becoming more familiar, that's going to change, and you'll see, you know, plumbers embracing this just like everyone else. But in some of the early adopters from the installer side were actually HVAC contractors, the people who are putting in your space heating solution. So that's something to look at.
Well, Tristan, thanks a lot. I think you've summed it up for me. This has been fantastic. Thanks for sharing your experience on 240 volts, 120 volts, different locations, and yeah, really appreciate the time and expertise. Yeah, Brian, anything else to add?
No, I don't think so. This has been great. And Tristan, really appreciate your time and expertise here. I think all of you out there will agree we had the right person to ask these questions to, someone who's installed a lot of them. So thank you, Tristan. Thank you all who tuned in today, and we'll be sending recording and all the presentation materials out to everyone. And yeah, good luck with all your electrification projects. Be sure to get in touch with us if you have questions that didn't get answered. We'll try to make sure that we can find an answer for you.
Great. Thanks so much, y'all. We'll talk to y'all soon.
Bye-bye.
Great. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today, Making Your Go Electric Plan, Tools and Resources to Get You Started. I'm Joe Archunas with Electrify Now, here with my teammate Shannon Wilson. We'll introduce Nick Stevens, our panelist, in just a second. Welcome. Great to have you all here. This webinar is being brought to you in part by the LEARN program. LEARN is a San Diego-based workforce education and training program that is partnered with Electrify Now to offer free energy efficiency and electrification webinars. Please visit the LEARN website for more information, www.sandiegolearn.com. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about your electrification plan. I mean, electrifying everything can feel overwhelming. There's so much to do. Today's webinar will walk you through how to get started, what you should do, and how to break down your home electrification into manageable chunks. And then we'll talk about all the resources that exist to help you do that. Second here. Okay, and this is part of our Go Electric series. This series focuses on the benefit of electrification for homeowners. There's so many benefits. They include lower energy bills, less pollution indoors, less pollution outdoors, lower carbon emissions, more comfortable homes, and increased safety. And throughout this year, we're going to be looking at all the different electrification technologies as part of our Go Electric series.
So for many people who are interested in electrifying, their first question is, as Joe mentioned, how do I get started? And that's because transitioning your home is it's a process, not a single project when you're transitioning to efficient electric. So an electrification plan is incredibly helpful. If you have an informed plan, it'll help the process go way more smoothly. And that's whether you want to swap systems out one at a time as they fail, or if you're ready to do multiple projects all at once. So today we're going to go over how to make an electrification plan, starting with taking a home inventory. So an important first step is to look through your home and take stock of what systems you have in place and what condition they're in. As you're doing this, you can give some thought to what upgrades are highest priority to you and what systems and appliances seem like really prime candidates for replacement. You can see someone here is doing an inventory and they're looking at their water heater. So you can see what the fuel source is, the capacity, and determine its age. Sometimes that's pretty obvious. In our inventory, we have a link to some information for how to determine the age of your water heater, if that's a little ambiguous. But you'll want to go through your home and just kind of take stock. We do have this inventory worksheet available for download. And in just a few minutes, you'll get a tour of an online tool that will give you another way to take an inventory.
Great. Another step on your electrification plan is to check your electrical panel. I mean, your electrical panel may be something you never think about.
But as you electrify, it's something you want to look at. You'll want to see what is your panel's capacity. Most panels are rated by how many amps of electricity they provide. And typically they're either 100 amp or 200 amp panels. The top circle shows you where you can check for that. If you have a 200 amp panel, you should be good for almost any type of electrification you need to do at your home. If you have 100 amps, you can still electrify, but might have to put more thought into the devices you get, or you might want to upgrade your panel. You'll also want to check how much space you have for new circuits. That's the bottom circle in this slide. Don't worry if you don't have too much space. My panel doesn't have much. There are strategies for this, like sharing circuits, but chatting with an electrician, of course, is crucial, as they'll be able to help you understand your panel and map out what you need to do to electrify. We'll do a deeper dive on electrical panels in a future session. Creating a home energy audit is another step. Getting a home energy audit. It's a great idea. An energy audit it will help you understand your current home systems and what might be lacking. For example, you might not have insulation in your attic, and that might be a good first step before you get a heat pump so you can right-size your heat pump. A home energy audit might also help you understand which appliances and equipment are oldest in your home and what might need to be prioritized for replacement. So that is a great audit, or that's a great idea. We also wanted to point out that there's no correct starting point for electrification in your home. Your value system should guide you on what to electrify first. For example, maybe your family members have asthma, like my family members do. And so getting that gas stove out of your home that's causing significant air pollution is the right first step for you. Or maybe you really want to get to quicker savings, lower utility bills. And so an electric vehicle or water heater might be that right first step. Maybe your home's drafty and you're tired of that on-off blast from your gas furnace, or you're looking for air conditioning as things get hotter. And so that heat pump is right for you. Maybe your energy audit reveals that you have some really old appliances, a 35-year-old water heater, and you should start there so you're not replacing an emergency, and that's the right first step. Or maybe you want to electrify quickly and on a budget, and yard tools and electric barbecue, which we'll be doing some sessions on in the future, are the right first step there.
So if you're a homeowner, you likely know that choosing the right contractor is really key to a successful project. We recommend that you compare multiple estimates from trusted local contractors that are both experienced with electrification and enthusiastic about electrification. Always make sure you use written contracts with the contractors you work with, and make sure you ask them about incentives. Reputable contractors are usually very knowledgeable about the incentives, and they can help you select the equipment that will qualify for the incentives, which is pretty important. If you are in California or Washington, you can check out SwitchesOn, switcheson.org, and that has a helpful database of electrification-friendly contractors. And there are others as well, but this is one that is good if you're in California or Washington. And then I mentioned the incentives. So getting informed about incentives will really help this whole process be more affordable. There's a combination of federal, local, and utility program incentives that will really help kind of lower the cost of all of these upgrades. The Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, provides federal tax credits and soon upfront rebates for almost every electrification project, as you can see here. Everything from the pre-work of electrical wiring and panels, energy audits, through weatherization, installing equipment, getting an EV and a charger, rooftop solar, and batteries. So all of this has incentives at the different levels. There are annual limits on the tax credits. Rewiring America calls this sort of an electrification bank account, though, because you can claim tax credits every year for the qualifying upgrades that you make. So if you plan out your upgrades over time, then you could take advantage of these tax credits. And there are some helpful online tools for navigating the incentives. Again, if you're in California or Washington, SwitchesOn is a great option. And the Rewiring America Incentives Calculator, which you'll get a peek at in a minute, also has a lot of great information about incentives geared towards the specifics of your household.
Awesome. Electrifying your home, especially if you have a lot of gas equipment like mine did when we bought it, is a process. And as Shannon was saying, maybe it should, and maybe it's better to space it out over time so you can maximize those rebates. Planning your electrification over time is what we did. We tried to tackle one big piece of equipment per year. When we first moved into our house, we got heat pumps. Then our stove was on the fritz, and we got an induction stove to replace our gas one. After that, our water heater was over 20 years old, and we wanted to replace it before it failed, so we got a heat pump water heater. When we were ready for a new vehicle, we got an EV. It's just planning your electrification over time is a great strategy. It doesn't have to happen all at once. Okay, so there's lots of resources to help you plan your electrification. Of course, check out our website, electrifynow.net. We have topics, we have all these topics covered in depth with links to some of the video resources that we've created on each of these electrification technologies. As Shannon mentioned, check out the Switches On for lots of great resources on electrification, and Electrify Oregon, if you're in Oregon, has a lot of great info as well. And now we're going to do a deep dive on one amazing new resource that came out this year, created by one of the leading organizations nationally in electrification, Rewiring America. This personal electrification planner allows you to plan how you will electrify and gives you a more in-depth guidance to everything we've been talking about. So let's get over to that, and I'll introduce our panelists today. Nick Stevens. Nick is co-founder and president of Go Electric Colorado. It's an organization empowering Coloradans with one-on-one support to go electric in their homes and communities, because so many of us need that one-on-one support. He's a BPI certified building analyst professional and a software engineer with more than a decade of experience. He is a founding member of the Rewiring America software engineering team and co-architect of the personal electrification planner, which we'll be talking about today. So Nick, great to have you on, and I'll stop sharing and have you take it away. While Nick's getting to share screen, folks, please put your questions in the Q&A. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, and it's great to be here with everyone. As Joe said, I'm going to be talking about the personal electrification planner, which I have up on the screen here. This is our homepage for homes.rewiringamerica.org. You may have seen the rewiringamerica.org website, which is a little more policy focused, but we've been releasing more and more content specifically for individuals who are trying to do this in their own homes. So the personal electrification planner is a free tool. We're a nonprofit, so we're not trying to make money off this or anything like that. So it's completely free. And if you want, you can feel free to pull it up and go along with me as we do this. And just know that any data you put in here is totally secure. We're not going to share it with any third parties or anything like that. But yeah, some of the reasons you might want a personal electrification plan, and Joe mentioned some of these, but everyone's situation is unique. Their home's unique, their cars are unique, their commutes are unique. So your plan should be as well. So we factor in a lot of those pieces as we build an electrification plan for you. And having an electrification plan, doing a little planning up front can help you to save money in the process. It also simplifies what is a pretty complex process. We have a number of how-to guides in the personal electrification plan for each one of the projects that we're going to talk about. And you can also balance a number of trade-offs. So Joe talked about some of these earlier, depending on what you're most interested in, whether it be air quality or maybe saving money, might determine which plan you go after first. And our model essentially, it crunches dozens of factors and compares to hundreds of different types of homes to deliver you cost and energy savings, incentives for these projects, and your climate impact on them. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and start kind of walking through this. I've already signed in here, but normally you'd click login up here, and you could log into a plan, create an account. But I'll click into my planner, and this is going to take us to the onboarding flow. And for the purposes of today's exercise, I went ahead and just grabbed a random home in San Diego to go ahead and try for our electrification plan. Hopefully no one knows who's living in that address. We have a couple different home types on here, house and townhouse. We do hope to provide additional types in the future, such as mobile and manufactured homes and condos and things like that. Right now, we're only supporting house and townhouse. This is primarily a tool for homeowners. We do have renters content, though, that's available on this consumer website that doesn't even require a login. So feel free to look into that if you're currently a renter. For now, though, I'm going to go ahead and keep with this, and I'll click next. So this is our our default setup for a home based on homes that are in this county of a similar type. So we pull a bunch of defaults and make our best guess about, you know, what your home may have in terms of square footage, heating fuel, type of clothes dryer, all that kind of thing. So if you have a home that's slightly different from those in your area, you might need to go in and, you know, make sure that you check these, but I would recommend checking all of these anyways and making sure that they're all correct. For the purposes of today's exercise, I'm just going to go with the defaults minus filling this one out, and we'll click next. Here, we just have a few questions about, you know, what is your motivation for electrifying? The idea is here is that in the future, we'll be able to kind of tailor the plan a little bit more to these motivations. And then if you have a vehicle, then you can select the vehicle and your engine type and whether you have an EV charger or not. If you live in an area where you don't need a vehicle, you can go ahead and click no. We'll just skip that part and you've already got part of your plan done. So with that, I'll click next. And then this final step of the onboarding process is income. We use this information to determine your eligibility for certain rebates and tax incentives and other things of that nature. So I'll go ahead and put a value in here for now. And with that, we get our electrification plan. So we've crunched all the numbers, and this is what we've come up with for this home in San Diego. And I'm just going to kind of speak real quick up front here about a couple of the items that are on this plan. You'll see that we have an incentives line item for each project. This is based only on federal incentives right now. We are going to be adding state, local, and utility incentives in. In fact, our rewiring calculator, which you may be familiar with, and I'll show that a little bit later, has launched state and local incentives in a number of states and territories. So Colorado, Illinois, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Virginia, Vermont, and DC. All of those we have state, local, and utility incentives for in our calculator. And we'll be bringing more and more states online and bringing that into PEP pretty shortly here. The other thing I'll mention is, so bill impact. This is, you know, your approximate impact from doing this project on your yearly utility bills. So things like pre-wiring and home energy audit won't have any impact. But if you get an electric vehicle, you could save up to $1,800 in this case per year. And then upfront cost, this is before all of the incentives that are available to you. So this is just your upfront cost. And then, you know, depending on what incentives you're actually available for, you'll be able to subtract that cost to get to your actual net cost. So I'll dive into each one of these projects and we can talk about them. As Joe mentioned earlier, a home energy audit is a really great place to start for any electrification plan. An energy auditor can do things such as a blower door, which will help you determine how tight or leaky your home is. And they can also give you some direction in terms of weatherization. And weatherization, so doing air sealing and adding insulation, can really bring down your install and operating costs. But more than that, it can actually make for just a way more comfortable home. We spend a ton of time in our home, and just spending a little bit of money on weatherization can go a really long way to home comfort. It's also really great for heat pumps. Having a fully weatherized house will help a heat pump run a lot more efficiently. Another thing that an energy auditor will consider is health and safety in your home. If you have existing fossil fuel appliances, they can test those to make sure that they're not leaking any carbon monoxide into your home. So they'll do a combustion safety test. And, you know, if one of those fails, it could be a big impact on your electrification plan. It may be that you want to tackle that one first. So it's a really great thing to do first to kind of get an idea of prioritization for the rest of the plan. And I'll click into one of these projects here. So we have project detail pages for each one of these. These include a quick introduction to the project. We have some cost and benefits on here for that project. Some projects have more of these than others. Energy audit's pretty simple and straightforward, so not as much here. You can see rebates and credits for those, a project guide, the ability to look at a contractor, which I'll get into more later, and then some more info linking out to sections and frequently asked questions. So going back, looking at pre-wiring here real quick, which Joe mentioned, great idea to take a look at your panel and see what your current capacity is on that biggest breaker, which will often be up at the top. As Joe mentioned, if you don't have a 200 amp panel, there are opportunities to still electrify. We have a great thing here called the Watt Diet. So how to electrify on a 100 amp panel. You can check out resources like that on these project specific pages. And so that's a good one to check out if you have a smaller panel. But another reason to consider doing pre-wiring and panel up front is you can save a lot of money by doing the wiring for your stove, your EV, your dryer, and your heat pump water heater all at once, rather than breaking those out and doing them in separate projects. Of course, it's perfectly fine to do it that way. You just may, have an electrician coming out to your house a lot more often than might normally happen if you did it all up front. Now to get into the projects where you can actually save some money and really cut your carbon impact. And that would be these projects down here. So I'll start with the EV is often the biggest climate savings and the biggest personal cost savings as well. So often you'll see that at the top of this list. We have information in here on like whether or not you would want a level 2 charger. In most cases, yes, it's going to help you to charge a whole lot faster. So you can click into that project and learn more info about that. We have energy bill impact, climate impact on here as well, and a whole bunch of information. I'll talk to here about solar. So solar is another really big opportunity for cost savings. And I understand not everyone has the ability to put solar on their roof. There's also the opportunity to do community solar where you sign up for a solar farm. We have some information on that on the project detail page. We also talk a little bit about batteries on that page as well. But primarily this project is about getting solar. I'll say a quick note too about sizing for solar. How you size your solar system is going to change depending on the number of electric appliances that you're going to be adding. So if you do solar before you do all these other upgrades, make sure that whoever's designing your solar system is considering what your usage is going to be once you've done all of these upgrades. So want to kind of time those things specifically. It is possible to just go ahead and do community solar for now and then add solar to your roof after you've done these upgrades, so you have a better idea of what your electrical usage is and you can kind of fine tune it. And then one of our favorite ones to talk about is always the heat pump. We combine heat pump and weatherization into one project in the electrification plan. So a heat pump is great if you haven't heard of one. It both heats and cools. It's like a two-way AC. Same technology as in your refrigerator, just goes both ways. And they tend to be about 3 times more efficient than any fossil fuel heating resource. We also break out weatherization costs here. So if we go to the project detail page, you can see the cost for a heat pump specifically, and then the cost for different types of weatherization. And depending on your home and the results of your energy audit, you may not need some of these things. So you may be able to totally skip them and save a whole lot upfront on that upfront cost. And doing weatherization up front can sometimes allow you to install a smaller heat pump than you might otherwise. You'll often do what's called a manual J, and the manual J takes into account the weatherization of the home, and it can sometimes require a smaller heat pump if you have already done weatherization. So that's another reason why we have some of these pre-work projects. Let's see, and Joe's favorite, the heat pump water heater here, we'll get into. So heat pump water heaters are 3 to 4 times more efficient than traditional water heaters. One thing to consider in doing a heat pump water heater is they can often be a little bit larger. So you want to consider that for any space requirements you may have compared to your existing water heater. But they're really incredible devices. They have extremely low electrical draw compared to if you've ever seen like the on-demand water heaters. A lot of times, because we talk about, sizing your panel appropriately here, a lot of times those on-demand water heaters will take a really, really large chunk of your electrical capacity from your panel. However, heat pump water heaters are a pretty low draw, so a really great solution for electrifying your whole home. If there's any chefs out there in the audience, hopefully you've heard of this next one, which is the induction stove. So if you've previously used an electric resistance stove, like I had one of those at my old houses, you will be amazed by an induction stove. It is just an absolute incredible electric device. You get far better power and control than both gas stoves and electric resistance stoves. You can boil water in something like 90 seconds for your pasta. and you get immediate response to temperature changes when you do them with your knob or your dials on there. And one of the huge things that was mentioned earlier, there's no pollution with an induction stove. There's a study that was done that attributed 13% of asthma cases in the US were linked to gas stoves. So if you have small children or any pre-existing conditions, this can be a really great one to do for your air quality impact. And I'll note on this one specifically, this one actually shows bill impact going up. We don't want to hide that. There are some things where there might be an increase in bills due to going electric. That's why we encourage you to do this plan so that you can know up front what the differences may be. I will note, mileage may vary a little bit on that. Everyone has, very unique things. The shading from trees outside your home can change, the cooling and heating capacity of your home. So it's not going to be dead on perfect, but we get pretty close to give you an idea. And the last one I'll talk about here is the dryer. We have a lot of different recommendations. You can use a heat pump, a condenser dryer, or an electric resistance dryer. All are great. All are great for getting off of gas. And then I want to show real quick, I'm going to go ahead and exit the plan. So we have our incentive calculator in here that I mentioned earlier, and we'll go ahead and pull up some incentives. So we'll break out, this is where you can find the state, local, and utility incentives if we've launched them for your state. And so you can find those in here. And then another tool that's really great is as you're going through and doing these projects, you're going to need contractors for help with a lot of them. So specifically, we have a zip code of 92124. We'll enter our project type. I want to do actually a heat pump and hit search. And we'll give you access to contractor networks. So you heard switches on earlier mentioned, and that's one of the contract networks that we link out to. We're going to be adding specific contractors to this in the near future, but for now we're just linking out to places where we know they have an established criteria for contractors as we're kind of building our own. But the goal is to be able to get you two contractors to help you complete these projects, and these are great resources for doing so. And there should be results for every project nationwide. And we'll be slowly adding more and more of those over time. A couple of things that we're working on bringing into this plan coming up. As I mentioned, we're going to have state, local, and utility incentives for a lot more states. And then we're also adding those specifically to the project pages that I showed earlier. We're also adding additional languages. You'll see we already have the calculator in Spanish. And we have some of our consumer content like the project pages in Spanish. We're trying to get the entire site converted over to Spanish and add additional languages on top of that so that everyone who wants to can access this. And then we're also going to be developing some project-specific tools like a Likely Savers widget and a heat pump tool. After you've gotten a chance to check this out, if you have any feedback, you can go down here to this Give Feedback button and click that. And we'd love to hear what you have to say about the tool. We read every single piece of feedback, respond to everything we can. And we'd really appreciate any feedback you have. You can also send it to homes@rewiringamerica.org. And yeah, I think with that, I'll go ahead and pull the planner back up. But yeah, I encourage everyone, give this a shot, and would love to hear what you think about it. Our main motto here is, whatever you can do to kind of wrap your head around these complex projects is great, but when it dies, electrify is what we like to say, and we want you to be prepared for doing that. And I think this is a great way to take a step in that direction.
Love that, Nick. Thanks so much. Maybe it's like before it dies, electrify, right?
Yeah, before it dies for sure, but certainly don't go trying to put in a new gas water heater without going and looking at all your options in an electrification plan.
Love that. Cool. I specifically want to call, I love that project detail page that you had, and the 100 amp panel, or how to electrify a 100 amp panel. Having that resource is just fantastic. All right there for folks. Cool. Well, we've got some questions coming in that we can help field here for a couple minutes. Questions on this personal electrification planner is one really important tool. What about some folks were asking for some of the one-on-one coaching as well? I know you had started that in Colorado, but any advice for folks who are looking for an advisor to help them in addition to this online platform?
Absolutely. If you're in Colorado, go to goelectriccolorado.org and we can give you a hand. If you're not in Colorado, one thing you might consider doing is going and getting trained to do this yourself. So we have a program, an electrification coach program. And the best way to find it right now, this is kind of a little bit backwards, but go to the renters and go to electrification for renters. And we have these programs down at the bottom here. There's a Why Electrify course and an Electric Coaches program course. And both of these will give you all of the information that you need to kind of get started with electrification. And then the Electric Coaches program will go a step further than that and teach you how to become an electric coach. Now there are existing programs out there for electric coaches, so you can check and see if your community has one. I know Massachusetts has a great one called Heat Smart Alliance. And we're training these coaches throughout the country right now. So I hope that every community is going to have these slowly. I hope that in the future, we're going to be able to actually connect you directly to a coach within the personal electrification planner, but we have to kind of build up the coach network first and get everybody trained. So if that's something that you would know would benefit you, maybe just consider becoming a coach, because probably your friends would benefit from you being the coach. And we'd love to get you in there to do the training. The training is completely free. There's no cost for it at all. It's a 4-week training. And yeah, it's a great way to kind of learn about this stuff and learn how to do it on your own home.
Great. I see another question quickly, and one person is asking about, if they have a triplex, how do they use this? How do they use this planner, since their building type isn't quite in there in the planner? Any recommendations for folks who don't have a housing type that the planner is supporting right now?
I think, but I'm not an expert on that part necessarily. I'm not an architect, but I think that the townhouse sitting in here would cover that. So let me go ahead and reset here. So we have the townhouse sitting. I think that would apply for a triplex. It's not going to work necessarily for like a condo, like a multi-story condo. It would probably be a little bit off. You could certainly go in and try and put your address in and just kind of see what comes up, and it might give you some kind of idea. But I wouldn't say, if you're in a condo that would work. But I think a triplex would absolutely work for the townhouse setting here.
Great, thanks.
I see a couple questions about induction that we might be able to answer. One of them was if the cost listed in the planner for induction includes the cost of new pots and pans. And I'm assuming not, but you may not need new pots and pans. Most pans work, you can test them by sticking a magnet to the bottom of your pot. And if it sticks to the pan, then it'll work with induction. So cast iron and stainless steel pots are all induction compatible. It's just aluminum, glass, and all copper that won't work. So you may not have to replace all your pans, but maybe just get a 1 or 2 extra. And the other question about induction was about, I believe, let's see, where was that? Something about the cost. Maybe the planner is saying that there might be a cost increase and an energy increase when you use induction.
Yeah, so the plan shows that specifically in this case. That might not be the case for all homes, so I encourage you to go and take a look at that. So yeah, I don't know specifically why there's an increase in energy on this, this specific home. It's hard to kind of know, exactly why the model might have said that for this home, but I haven't been inside this home, so I just kind of chose one randomly. But I know for me, like I have an induction stove, and I have not seen any major increases from doing this. I've done everything but a heat pump water heater, and I've seen decreases for utility bills across the board.
Great, and then yeah, maybe you were showing that little part on the induction stove and which pots and pans work. Yeah,
so we have these project guides down here, and we're actually going to be launching a feature where you can go through and kind of check these off one by one. But we have one section on here about testing your pots and pans, and Shan was exactly right. If you put a magnet up to it, it should give you a good idea as to whether it will work in induction on an induction stove or not.
Right.
It does not, to answer the first part of that question, though, it does not include the cost of new pots and pans in the in here. But you can get most pans nowadays will work with induction, so you can get them pretty cheaply.
And Nick, maybe a clarification. Some folks are wondering, will this work in my area? And then do the costs translate by the area? Like for example, the savings, does that translate by whatever zip code they put in?
It does. So the only two places we don't currently have support for is Hawaii and Alaska, and that's just because the ResStock model, which is an NREL model, the National Renewable Energy Lab, they don't have Hawaii and Alaska yet. So we're working to get those in there, but it will work for every other place in the United States. If you have a home that's an outlier, it may be a little bit different, but for the majority of homes, I think this should work, and the costs do adjust based on location. A lot of our data is coming from a lot of our upfront cost data, I should say, is coming from Massachusetts and California, which tend to be more expensive places, but we adjust that for location-specific costs.
Perfect. Shannon, do you have any questions? I saw one on batteries that some folks were wondering if batteries will be a technology featured in the planner, stationary batteries for homes.
Yeah, so we do talk about batteries in the solar project. They commonly are paired together when they're installed, so we decided to talk about there. But we don't have a specific breakout project for batteries, just because it's not something that everyone is going to want. And it's not something that you necessarily need to go fully electric. So if you want to learn about batteries, you can do that on the solar page. And we'll have, it's not included though in the upfront cost breakdown. And we don't have any plans to add battery upfront costs at this time, but I think it's something we certainly could do in the future.
I see a question in the chat. Someone's wondering, they have a tankless gas water heater in a closet, and they're wondering if a heat pump water heater would work for them. Joe, you might know that.
Short answer is you should definitely look into it. You just want to make sure your heat pump water heater can get the air space that it needs. It usually needs about between 450 and 700 cubic feet of air. And so sometimes closets don't have that much airspace, but there's easy ways to either put a vent or a louver door, and you can put a heat pump water heater in an interior closet. We have done that in our house. So as long as you make sure it has enough air, yes, and you will get some cooling from your heat pump water heater, so you want to think about that as well. Great. Well, any last thoughts, Nick, for folks who are getting started on their electrification plan? What should we leave them with from this tool?
Homes.rewiringamerica.org. It's totally free, so there's nothing to lose to go and try it out. And hopefully it'll help wrap your head around what is unfortunately a somewhat complex process, but we give you all the steps to break down each one of these projects and as much information as we can. So check it out, send us some feedback, and we'd love to hear from you.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Nick, for being on and walking us through the personal electrification planner. Hope everyone gets to try that out and spread the word. Let us know if you have any questions on your electrification journey. And thanks for being with us. And as we say with all our webinars, good luck on your electrification projects. We'll see you soon.
Climate change is proceeding at about the pace that scientists expected, but the impacts have been really eye-opening. Something, that I didn't expect so much is how vulnerable we've been to this whole new climate of the 21st century. And it gives me great concern. I mean, we're not anywhere prepared for what's hitting now, and we're totally unprepared for what's coming at us. So you need to have people who understand climate communication to properly educate and motivate folks about what's coming. It's nonprofit, which means that there's no BS about trying to sell products. You can go to YCC to get unbiased information about weather and climate change.
Hi, I'm Sarah Peach. I'm the editor-in-chief of Yale Climate Connections. There is a ton of information on the internet, but a lot of it is not good. And especially with AI and bots, it can be really, really difficult for people to tell what's real, what's good information about climate change.
Hi, my name is Pearl Marvel. I'm the features editor at YCC. I'm not going to give the same amount of time to someone spouting this misinformation as I am to like a scientist that has actually studied this stuff. We're coming from a scientific background. All our stories are based in scientific fact.
And it's incredibly important for people to understand what's happening to our atmosphere and what they can do about it. And we have really great experts who know what they're talking about.
My PhD was focused on air pollution again, and I was doing computer modeling of storms, large, low-pressure systems, studying how they transport air pollution from polluted areas near the surface, and they can potentially spread it worldwide.
Empecé en periodismo hace mucho tiempo, más de 25 años, y empecé escribiendo sobre deportes. Y empecé allí, pero después fui cambiando de fuentes, fui haciendo periodismo comunitario, hasta que me topé con el tema del cambio climático hace alrededor de 3 años, que me pareció muy importante porque es el único planeta que tenemos.
So another huge advantage that we have as an organization is our relationship with the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, which is a research group based at Yale that has been doing surveys of the American public for more than a decade. They have developed an incredible body of knowledge about what our audiences understand about climate change and their beliefs and attitudes about climate change.
And what they found was that people of Hispanic heritage were more likely to be alarmed or concerned about climate change versus white people here in the U.S. And so this year, we're getting even more ambitious with our Spanish language content. We brought on board 3 native Spanish speakers to be regular contributors. Es muy importante conocer a la comunidad latina, porque cuando hablamos de la comunidad latina pensamos que es un todo, y la comunidad latina es muy heterogénea. Es muy diferente hablarle a un latino de Miami, a uno de Orlando, a uno de Texas, a uno que está en Los Ángeles, a uno que está en Nueva York. Entonces, por eso tenemos que enfocarnos bien en nuestras audiencias, hacer artículos pensando en esas personas, en cómo piensan, y por eso creo que es importante que periodistas nativos de Latinoamérica puedan hacer ese tipo de coberturas, porque es muy diferente lo que piensa un anglosajón o un estadounidense a lo que piensa un latino sobre diferentes temas. Entonces, creo que es muy importante hacer esa cobertura y no como lo vienen haciendo los grandes medios, que solamente traduciendo. Hay que hacer piezas enfocadas en cada una de esas audiencias. Me parece importante decir que el cambio climático y la preocupación la debemos transformar en ocuparnos, no solamente en preocuparnos, sino en ocuparnos del cambio climático y ver todos estos problemas que están sucediendo, verlos como una gran oportunidad para cambiar el curso de las cosas. Y también se debe cambiar un poco la narrativa, donde a los hispanos se les ve solamente como víctimas. También hay muchísimos hispanos que son activistas, que están más conscientes de las pequeñas acciones que debemos hacer diariamente para con el medio ambiente y para que preservemos este lindo planeta y para que las cosas salgan bien.
It's important not to let people despair, because there's certainly a tremendous amount of stuff coming at us that's going to be hard to deal with. So avoiding doom and despair is good.
We also try to provide explainers and toolkits for people so that they can do actionable things, whether that is like preparing for extreme weather.
We offer, for example, an article about how to lobby your member of Congress. We are looking for an audience that's not just sort of passively consuming our content. We really invite everybody to take action and to use our information to take action.
What gives me hope is I do think these next generations are mad. They're angry at what previous generations have done, including my generation. I do think you need to be a little bit angry to make change. What also gives me hope, though, is going to places like the Caribbean, like Puerto Rico, and seeing what communities are doing. I think very much that the change lies in these communities that have been marginalized by the government and by history for so long.
We're going to get through this. It's going to be hard, but we have a lot of creativity. We have a lot of technology that's going to come to bear. A lot of good people are working on this problem. So I get inspired by all the good people I see doing work in this. It's really exciting, some of the cool stuff going on now. We just didn't start it in time. The clean energy revolution is impressive and exciting. I mean, come on, solar is the most cheap sort of power in world history now, and it's really growing by leaps and bounds. So a lot of positive things, but it's nowhere near fast enough and widespread enough to avert a crisis. We are in a crisis.
Our instinct in a time of disaster is to help each other. We've all had that experience with a friend or a neighbor who's in trouble. You want to help that person. And that's a really important part of what it is to be a human. And I hope that people don't forget that's part of us.
Fueling a crisis. Coming up in this video, I'll show you how what you eat affects our climate. Do you have to go vegan to save the planet? Or at the very least, can Meatless Mondays help? I'll look at the truth behind these claims. Our weather is getting more extreme and unpredictable, and the large amounts of carbon pollution we're adding to the atmosphere is making things worse. Shockingly, about 1/3 of all climate warming gases are linked to food.
So amazingly, what you choose to eat for dinner can actually get traced back to what kinds of gases were emitted into the atmosphere, how did that impact climate, and through that, how we're seeing long-term trends in changes in weather patterns.
Most food-related climate pollution comes from agriculture and land use. Animal-based foods like meat and dairy are the two biggest culprits. Beef production requires vast amounts of land. Farmers often create new pastures by cutting down trees, which releases the heat-trapping carbon dioxide stored in forests. Fertilizing feed for these animals emits nitrous oxide, another climate-warming gas. And nitrous oxide is nearly 300 times more potent at warming the planet than carbon dioxide. Now, farmers use it to increase crop production, but crops only take in about half of the nitrogen they get from the fertilizers. The rest runs off into waterways or gets broken down in the soil and is then released into the atmosphere. Lastly, when cows, goats, and sheep digest their food, they burp out methane, a potent climate pollutant. And all of this pollution rises into the atmosphere and traps in heat.
14.5% of greenhouse gas emissions come from industrial animal agriculture. And that's because of the inputs that we have to add to create that food. It's the distance we have to send those products. Everything we do has some impact on the planet. It's simply the case that animal products have a higher environmental footprint, including climate change.
One study found that replacing 50% of meat and milk products with plant-based alternatives would cut this pollution by almost 1/3. Producing plant-based foods requires fewer natural resources, less water, less energy, and is less taxing on the climate compared to animal-based foods. So eating a meatless diet can reduce the pollution that drives climate change. Vegan diets have the lowest carbon footprint, but if you just can't imagine giving up meat, well, there's another diet that has a little more wiggle room while still helping the climate. Brian Cateman coined the term reducitarian and is the co-founder of the Reducitarian Foundation.
For me and my colleague who created this term is that for a lot of people, the idea of cutting back on animal products or going vegan is intimidating. And we really wanted to create a positive and inclusive term of moral worth for adding more plant-based foods in one's diet. And so someone can cut back on animal products by pursuing Meatless Monday, where they don't eat meat on Monday. They can try Weekday Vegetarian, as the founder of that idea said, nothing with a face, Monday through Friday. Or you can try Mark Bittman's approach, vegan before 6. So for breakfast and lunch, you have vegan meals, and for dinner, it's your choice. But the idea is that meat consumption doesn't need to be an all or nothing premise.
In the US, beef consumption has been steadily falling, and options for plant-based protein have grown. That means there are a lot more options if you're trying to eat less meat.
The trade-off here is people have to find a way to enjoy life and then live in line with their values. And one way of straddling those two poles is to try to make a concerted effort to cut back on animal products. Now that can be 10%, it can be 20%, or it could be 100%. But every single plant-based meal we have on average is one that is more environmentally friendly than one that's derived from animals.
One study found that eating animal products in moderation still helps the climate. The study showed that a vegan diet has the smallest impact on the climate, but a vegetarian diet that includes eggs and dairy helps the climate almost as much. Another diet that scored well, it's called the climatarian diet.
A climatarian looks at the carbon intensity of the products that they're choosing, and they shape their diet in that way. A powerful way is if meat and dairy consumption is high, then a shift to maybe a more plant-rich diet can have a significant impact.
This diet puts the weight on eating foods that have a low impact on the environment. It's understanding how foods are produced, processed, and transported.
Any of our food choices impact the environment. If I buy an organic strawberry that was grown in South America and it gets shipped all the way up here, even as a vegetarian, I'm making choices that have climate impacts. So not being a vegetarian, you can absolutely still have a positive impact on climate simply by understanding where your food is coming from.
The climatarian diet is predominantly plant-based: fruits, veggies, legumes, nuts, fish, and whole grains. One restaurant chain is even promoting climate-conscious eating by putting climate labels on its foods.
A carbon label is usually calculated using something called a life cycle analysis, and that means that it is calculating the total greenhouse gas emissions associated with every step of that product's life cycle, covering from when the land is used to grow the food all the way down to when that food ultimately ends up being used or even wasted.
Just Salad was the first restaurant chain in the US to display the carbon footprint of its menu items, showing diners each item's environmental impact.
Providing the carbon label right alongside that nutrition information really weaves together the story of everyday health and sustainability. And I think we've already seen a number of restaurants take on carbon labeling, especially in the US and definitely abroad. It's really heartening to see, other companies starting to carbon label their menus and finding different ways to make it actionable, like Just Salad has, to really engage with this information and understand it and make it actionable.
Saying you are what you eat is now taking on even greater weight.
I think people recognize that there is a real impact from food. And so when you're making choices, that is an expression of what it is that you care about. And I think people are recognizing that more and more and are trying to align their values, let's say in the context of climate change, to eat foods that are producing fewer greenhouse gas emissions. And I think that's a really great thing. And I hope that we see more people making the connection between climate and food in the future.
So you don't have to go totally vegan to save the planet, and Meatless Mondays do help. Just know what you're eating, your food print, and the impact it has. Choosing foods with the climate in mind will actually help take a bite out of global warming. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. The climate, we live it, we love it, we study it. But how about today we have some fun with it? So get your pens out and your head in the game. How well do you know your weather and climate trivia? And how well do you think it can do against some of the masters in the field? Well, you're about to find out. Here's how the game will work. I'll ask a weather or climate trivia question. Contestants have 10 seconds to write down their answers. Correct answer gets 1 point. Whomever has the most points at the end wins. So let's meet our contestants. Our first contestant hails from Michigan. He was a NOAA hurricane hunter, co-founded the Weather Underground, is a master of all things weather and climate. He is Dr. Jeff Masters. Contestant number 2, a native of Oklahoma City who loves photography, pop culture, and long bike rides. He is a meteorologist, a journalist, and author. Let's welcome Bob Henson to the game. And contestant number 3, this bilingual meteorologist has won 4 Emmy Awards as an author and has led weather teams at Univision and at NBC, where he still is today. Welcome, John Morales. Now, these men are friends, but today they fight for domination in their field and only one man can win. So, let's play. First question. Oxford Dictionaries chose the phrase climate emergency as its word of the year in which year? Was it 2019, 2020, or 2021? All right. Pens down. John, your answer. 2019. Okay, correct. Jeff, your answer. Oh, okay. All right, and Bob, your answer. 2019. All righty, that's good. All right, good job. Question number 2. Death Valley, California holds the record for the hottest place on Earth. It hit 134 degrees in 1913. That same year, it had its coldest temperature ever. What is the coldest temperature ever recorded in Death Valley in Fahrenheit? All right, your answer, John Morales. 34 degrees, okay? Jeff, your answer? 20 degrees. Bob Henson, where do you come in at? 23 degrees. The answer is 15 degrees from January 1913. None of you got that one right. Question number 3. Phoenix set a record in July 2023 with its streak of consecutive days at or above 110 degrees. How many days was that streak? All right, John, your answer. 16 days, all right? Jeff, your answer. 31 days. Bob Henson. 30 days, all right. Jeff Masters takes it home. 31-day streak of highs at or above 110. Previous record, 18 days in 1974. Jeff Masters for the win. Woohoo! Question number 4. New York City had a record streak in 2023 without any measurable snow. How many days was this snowless streak in New York City? Was it 700, 701, or 702 days? All right, pens down, answers up. Let's start with you, John. 702 days, all right? 701, Jeff Masters is right, and Bob Henson goes 702. Jeff Masters for the win. 701 days, it ended January 16th with just 1.4 inches of snow. To number 5. What is the only known hurricane whose lifespan lasted 2 calendar years? Pens down. John Morales, what do you got? Oh, a question mark. Okay. Jeff, what do you say? All right.
Zeta 2005.
All right. Nope. Bob Henson, are you coming in with Alex? Oh, you guys were close. Hurricane Alice, December 1954, 1955. All right. So nobody gets it. Wow, I was trying to be easy too. Here's question number 6. In 2023, Canada was affected by record-setting series of wildfires. The smoke reached as far south as what U.S. state? Pens down to John. You got to know this one. Florida, you got it. All right. Florida for Jeff and Florida. Oh, Bob, nope, Georgia. It was Florida. So John and Jeff take home a point. All right, to question number 7. The National Weather Service in Buffalo, New York began service in 1870. In what year did they issue their first blizzard warning? Was it in 1957, 1967, or in 1977? All right, pens down to John. 1957. Jeff Masters, 1977. And to you, Bob. 1977. The year was January 28th, 1977. So a point for Bob and for Jeff. To question number 8. Which hurricane had the fastest intensification in history?
Are we talking Atlantic or Eastern Pacific, or can it be
The whole country, the world. Yeah, Eastern and Atlantic. All right, pens down to you, John Morales, our hurricane specialist. Patricia, he takes it home. Jeff Masters, Patricia. Bob Henson, Patricia. All right, 8 was a winner. You all are going home with a point. To question number 9. The movie The Wizard of Oz was released in 1939. It was the first movie to depict an authentic-looking tornado. What was that tornado made out of? All right, pens down. John Morales has got the shrug. Have you ever seen it? Cotton balls. No, but that was a good effort. To Jeff Masters, a sock. Bob Henson, a muslin. The answer was a long muslin sock or stocking that was 35 feet long. All right, I'll give you to Jeff and Bob, you're going home with a point. All right, to question number 10. In what year was the first official Cat 5 hurricane in the Atlantic recorded? Was it 1924, 1934, or 1944? All right, to John Morales we go, your answer. 1924. Jeff? 1924 to Bob? 1944. The answer was 1924. So we've got John and Jeff coming home. All right, to question number 11. Which Midwest city had catastrophic damage from a deadly tornado outbreak of 17 tornadoes in 1959? The city's TV tower and hockey arena were destroyed. All right, pens down to John we go. Your answer? Joplin, Missouri. Okay, Jeff, your answer. Dubuque, Iowa. And Bob?
You know this one, Bob?
Fargo. The answer is St. Louis.
Oh, St. Louis.
The St. Louis tornado outbreak of February 1959 ripped apart the St. Louis arena and blew down the TV tower, causing catastrophic damage. 12. Now, this is a little bit of a personal question. The book, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Weather, was first published in 1999 by a broadcast meteorologist in New Haven, Connecticut. What was his name? I'll give you a clue. He started the meteorology program at Western Connecticut State University. Pens down.
I don't know.
Okay. You don't know, John? Jeff, any idea? Okay, Bob? Joe? No. I'll give you his first name. I'll give you another chance. His first name is Dr. Mel. Last name starts with a G, ends with an N, rhymes with Reinstein. All right, Dr. Mel Goldstein. 13. The worst tornado outbreak on record in U.S. history happened in 2011. How many tornadoes were reported in 2011 in that super outbreak? Was it 342, 352, or 362, affecting the South, the Midwest, and the East? All right, pens down. To you, John. How many tornadoes? 362. Right on, buddy. 362, Jeff. Oh, yeah, there we go. All right, points for all of you. Number 14. What was the costliest U.S. hurricane on record? All right, pens down. To John. Too easy for you? Harvey. All right, Jeff, to you. Katrina. Oh, even some stats and some facts. All right, to you, Bob. Katrina, yes, the answer. Hurricane Katrina in 2005, 198.8 billion, costliest storm on record. Harvey was the second, so you were close. All right, so we've got 2 points, Jeff and Bob. All right, 15. Which state in the contiguous U.S. has never had a tornado? All right, let's go, John. What do you got? Washington, Jeff Masters. Hawaii, Bob Henson. Rhode Island. Trick question, every state has had. Oh!
I was wondering.
Me too. Oh, I had to try. All right. I have to say, you guys were all awesome, fun, smart, amazing. Jeff Masters, you are the winner with 9 points.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Celebrate.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, there you go. So, Jeff, you don your crown, but the truth is, you may have won this, but you are all kings of the climate because of all the work you do and what you teach us and how much you've given us. So thank you very much. Thank you all for playing along with our masters in the field, and Jeff Masters takes home the title. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you. That was fun.
I have to admit, it was unfair. I studied.
Those were tough questions.
Yeah, I didn't want them to be tough, really. I tried not to make them tough.
When you're cooking in an electric kitchen, it is so much nicer. Induction, it just heats up so incredibly fast. It surprises you each time and you're just like, what? It's on, and count to 10, you're good. So I can boil water on mine really, really rapidly. And then on the low end, we can kind of Ron Propeel, like set it and forget it, and it just keeps this really stable low temperature. So it has that full range of output. It's so clean. We can wipe it down regularly instead of having to take these giant cast iron grates and scrub them in the sink. It's very quiet. We can listen to the music and we can hear the food. You can hear whether or not something is actually searing. So that kind of gentleness of an electric kitchen really helps you use those senses that maybe, are being drowned out by this whoosh of fire. It definitely keeps us cool in the summer. You don't have to be in this, hot, stressful environment all day long. It can just be stressful.